Today we're going to look at the quadratic formula. This should be a review. You have done this in Algebra 1 and in Algebra 2. The quadratic formula works for any quadratic equation. There are some instances when factoring and solving is definitely quicker, but there are some quadratic equations that can't be factored. We learned completing the square, but if this b value is odd, this b value, when we completed the square, we tried to find the number that 2 times something equaled this b value. If that b value is odd, then completing the square is not going to be the best method. So quadratic formula works always. I will tell you it is typically easier if a squared is positive. So if you have the ability to rewrite the equation so that a is positive, do it. And you have to have equals 0 before you can use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is, to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel, x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I'm never singing that again, so if you want to hear it again, you're going to have to rewind the video and watch it again. Or go to YouTube and search Quadratic Formula, Pop Goes the Weasel. There's apparently teachers who have all the time in the world, and they assign their kids to make quadratic formula videos and give them like a week to do it. I don't know where they find all this time, particularly with snow days. So there are plenty of quadratic formula videos on the internet that you can go look at. The quadratic formula is written in your notes. I will give you the quadratic formula on tests and quizzes, so you don't technically have to memorize it. However, it is easier to use if you have it memorized. And I'll be honest with you, every time I do quadratic formula, I hear Pop Goes the Weasel in my head as I go through the formula. So when we have a quadratic equation that we're planning on using the quadratic formula for, we first need to identify what is A, what is B, and what is C. And I'll actually write them right underneath. What is A? What number is in front of x squared? A 1. What is B? The number in front of x, 6. And C is the number by itself, negative 16. Quadratic formula goes like this. X equals the opposite of b. I call it the opposite of b because if b is positive, you put in negative. If b is negative, you would put in positive. So opposite of b, negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared. Did you notice that I put the 6 in parentheses?
Yes.
If our b is negative and you're going to plug it into your calculator, the parentheses are important. So I just get in the habit of always putting parentheses right there. B squared minus 4ac, so 4 times 1 times negative 16. All over, that means that the division bar goes across the whole thing. 2 times a, which is 1. I start underneath the radical. So in my calculator, I would type in 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 16. Or you could do 6 squared in your head and type in 36 minus 4 times 1 times negative 16. But take a moment, punch that in your calculator. Okay, I typed into my calculator, parentheses 6, close my parentheses, squared, minus 4 times 1 times negative 16, and I got 100. I would advise do not put the square root into your calculator yet, because sometimes this is going to be a perfect square, but sometimes it's not. And if it's not a perfect square, you don't want a decimal because there's some other things we got to do. So I have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 100 divided by 2. Now we happen to know that the square root of 100 is 10. And notice the quadratic formula already has the plus minus in there for us. So we have negative 6 plus or minus 10 all over 2. You have to do the entire top and then divide by 2. So we need to do, what is negative 6 plus 10? 4. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. One of our solutions is 2. Then we do the same problem using the subtraction. Negative 6 minus 10 is negative 16. Negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. Our two solutions are 2 and negative 8. Now, I'll tell you right now, this example would be a whole lot easier and quicker if we had just factored. Because two numbers that multiply to give you negative 16 and add up to 6, that would be negative 2 and positive 8. So then you could have done x minus 2, x plus 8 equals 0, and then you could solve it to get positive 2 and negative 8. So in this case, factoring would have been a lot simpler, but we did quadratic formula. All right, let's go to example 2. Is this one currently set up and ready for the quadratic formula? No, it says equals negative 5. We need it to equal 0. So rearrange it. 2x squared minus 4x plus 5 equals 0. Our A is 2. B is negative 4. C is 5. I would like you to pause the video and try to put these numbers into the quadratic formula correctly. Get your quadratic formula written out and then play the video to check your work. X equals the opposite of B. Our B is negative 4. The opposite of that is positive 4. So in the quadratic formula, when you see negative b, it's not really negative b, it's the opposite of whatever your b is. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. I'm going to put that negative 4 in parentheses, squared, minus 4ac, so minus 4 times 2 times 5, all over 2 times a, 2. Check to make sure that you have a positive 4 in front and a negative 4 in parentheses squared underneath the radical. When you type this into your calculator, again, I am not going to type all of it into my calculator. I am just going to type in the numbers that are underneath the radical. And I'm going to use parentheses around that negative 4, or you can do a little bit of mental math. Negative 4 squared is positive 16, and you could type in 16 minus 4 times 2 times 5. And what do we get? Negative 24. 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 24 all over 4. Okay, off to the side, I'm going to take the square root of negative 24 and simplify that. Think about positive 24. What perfect squares can we break positive 24 into? 4 and 6. And then that negative means that there's an I in there. Square root of 4 is 2. So this is 2i square root of 6. So if I move this down here, we've got 4 plus or minus 2i square root of 6 over 4. At this point, we need to look at the whole number pieces. So the 4, the 2, it's not going to let me highlight, is it? No, of course not. Why would it let me highlight? And the 4 on the bottom. So ignore the I, ignore the square root of 6. I is a square root of 6 is a square root. We can't mess with those, but we can mess with the whole number pieces. What do 4, 2, and 4 have in common? 2. We can divide all of them by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. If there's a 1 in front of the radicals, you don't have to write that 1. So whether you write 1i square root of 6 or just I square root of 6, that doesn't matter. This would be considered the simplified version. Now, some people take this a little bit further and write it like this. So they take the denominator 2 and just put it under both of the top pieces. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So 1 plus or minus I square root of 6 over 2 is also an acceptable answer, but you're going to see this version more often. This is the version that I prefer. Let's look at example 5, because apparently you all despise word problems for absolutely no reason whatsoever. The equation is y equals negative 0.013x squared plus 1.25x plus 5.6. I would ignore this thing for right now. The thing that you need to know is that x is the speed of the car and y is the fuel economy. Find the speeds, so they want us to find x, so x equals, at which you can travel and have a fuel economy of 32 miles per gallon. The fuel economy is y, so I'm going to put 32 miles per gallon in place of y. Is this currently ready for the quadratic formula? We need to have 0 equals, so subtract 32 on both sides. What is that?
What is what?
5.6 minus 32.
Yep.
Perfect. And now we can put this into the quadratic formula. Your A is negative 0.013. Your B is 1.25. And your C is negative 26.4. So take a moment, pause the video, and try writing this all into the quadratic formula. Now, when you have something like this, where clearly this is decimals, we're not going to simplify the square root of 0.1897. That's just ridiculous. So we're going to type this into our calculator. You need to type the entire top and hit enter, and then divide by the negative 0.026. If you try to just do it all in one step, then you would need parentheses around the entire top. That huge division bar acts as a grouping mechanism. You have to do the entire top group and hit enter, then divide by the negative 0.26 and hit enter. So I'm going to do negative 1.25 plus square root of 0.1897 and hit enter. You don't have to retype anything. Leave it in your calculator and push divided by negative 0.026. Enter. That is one of your answers, 31.3. So write down 31.3 as one of your answers. And they're talking about speed. So 31.3, let's just round that to 31 miles per hour, because I don't know any car that could do 31.3 miles per hour specifically. That's just kind of ridiculous. This statement up here in the original problem, 5 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 75. They're just saying that you're going to be traveling within 5 and 75 miles per hour. So 31 miles per hour is within that range, so it's an acceptable answer. We need to do this again using subtraction. So negative 1.25 minus the square root of 0.1897. Enter. Divided by negative 0.026. Enter. I'm going to round that to 65 miles an hour. Does that seem appropriate? Yeah. So 31 miles an hour and 65 miles an hour. So x equals 31 miles per hour and 65 miles per hour. If you travel exactly 31 miles per hour or 65 miles per hour, you should end up with a fuel economy of 32 miles per gallon. All right, and your book assignment I believe is 5 problems.